a lot of these people who would have their hands deep in the trenches, be doing the communication or leading, the relationship. And we quickly realized that they're not the best people to do that. One big part of the consulting engagement, I'd say 50% is the actual work and 50% is communicating what work is expected, when it's expected, why it's expected. So I think, that lead is super important. And, we have like 3 leads that we can staff at any given project, and they can usually take on 2 to 3 deals each.
Welcome to the Protocol Services podcast, where we talk with the specialist teams that are building the core services, from consultants, risk advisors, treasury managers, everything in between, to uncover more about the businesses, really helping build the decentral organizations, creating the future of Web3. Got a super special episode today. Got my close friend, founder, CEO of Delphi Digital here, Anil. What's up, man?
Hey, Jack. How you doing? Happy to be on, even though we haven't, listened to any of these episodes yet. I'm sure this is going to be, great pod.
Absolutely. Currently across the world from each other, but I'll be flying to Singapore to see you in person soon. But yeah, I figure we can get right into it. So I know you recently did a pod with Blockworks where you kind of talked about just the founding story of Delphi, kind of how you went from research, spun up this fund. So definitely recommend listeners check that out to get kind of the holistic picture. But for the sake of this convo, I really want to double click on the consulting aspect, right? The Protocol Services podcast, we want to know more about, again, these tangible services that teams are working on. So I guess, when was really the inception point where you figure, hey, let's put our brains together and actually kind of help the builders on the ground floor?
Yeah, it kind of started out of like necessity. When we first started Delphi back in 2018, we started as a research firm, but like first year, no one really paid us for research. There was like 2 or 3 real like investors looking at fundamentals, like shout out like Hash and Multicoin, right? Like some of our earliest clients. But other than that, it was really hard to get people to kind of care about really understanding how these protocols work and why they should actually pay for research, when, most investors back in the space were basically just using their network to get into deals very early on, and then, exchange listings and stuff like that to just get like quick flips, and not really needing to know how these protocols work. Basically, how we really got into it was like our first report was a big report on Bitcoin, talking about essentially like we wanted to write like the deepest report on Bitcoin. But then within that, we also pioneered a lot of analysis around hodl waves. And there were some, work done before that as well. But we basically used hodl waves to call kind of like a bottom for Bitcoin, right? And shout out my partner, Jan, who did a really good job here, because he basically called it to the week, first week of April. And that report's still out there. The Bitcoin report, did really well. The Bitcoin community obviously really loved it. And then our second report, we obviously wanted to cover Ethereum. Now, when we worked on the Ethereum report, again, we wanted our reports to be way more than just like overviews and summaries and everything like that. So we basically we're looking at different ways to add value to the community at large. And one of the ways that we basically went down was looking at the economics of E 2.0 at the time that were proposed. Obviously, this is back in 2018. And figuring out that we thought it wasn't, that yield wasn't going to be enough to, provide security for a network that we thought was going to move hopefully billions and, $1 trillion over the next few years. So essentially, we published like our proposal and pointed out that we thought this was a concern, gave some kind of like advice on what we thought, certain changes, and modeled out what we thought needed to be done. Now, when we published that report, it was funny because, again, that first report with Bitcoin was obviously, the Bitcoin community loved it because we were saying, hey, we're big fans of Bitcoin. We're really bullish on it, and we think it's bottoming soon. So everyone's like clapping, everyone's like retweeting. That got us from 0 to 1,000 followers. Now, Ethereum, when we published this report, this was the first time, and obviously this is our second report, so it's pretty early on in the Delphi's, life, where we got like a lot of hate on crypto Twitter. Ethereum bulls, it's I won't point out any names, but you can kind of think of like, the ETH maxis, who essentially, came at us and were just like, hey, like, you guys are Bitcoin maxis because you were really bullish on Bitcoin, and now you're trying to point out flaws in ETH. And we're like, whoa, no, like, we're really bullish ETH. We just want to, we think this is a concern that people should face. Like, we don't want to just paint this rosy picture if we don't, believe it. What was cool about that was, the first 12 hours, we were like, fuck, like, we don't even have a name for ourselves and people already hate us. And that's what it felt like at the time. But essentially what was really cool was within, 24 hours of that report, Vitalik and the whole E2.0 core team reached out. We ended up hopping on a call with them, sharing our models with them. And then within a month of that, Vitalik ended up pushing through a proposal that kind of like updated some of these economics. And he ended up going on some podcasts to shout us out. And that was like really when the floodgates for Delphi really started opening. And people, I think, started taking our research way more seriously. That's really where consulting was born out of. Because, Ethereum was very like organic, but, we were working with a few, we were working on some reports for, open finance, what ended up being DeFi at the time. We really were like early to synthetics, right? And we really loved how that team was thinking about using their token. Essentially, that spun, after we published our report, the team was like a really big fan, thought we, understood that protocol at the deepest level. It obviously helped them get exposure because they were able to send this report to people who were, trying to figure out how synthetics work. They had a lot going on, and they basically started reaching out to us to help essentially like consult for them, right? Mostly from like the risk side. So that was really how it started. So it was really early in the days, and it was awesome because, the subscription was obviously not paying the bills, and consulting was a really amazing way for us to start using a lot of the knowledge that we were kind of creating by doing all this research and applying it to the space.
So what was the kind of turning point or inflection where, okay, you're starting to get some organic interest, and I'm sure it was like, all right, hey, if these teams have money, like we're a scrappy startup, like we want to do this, we're bullish on the sector, we're bullish on the team, and it's going to get us more knowledge that kind of compounds and creates that flywheel at Delphi. But like, was there a certain point where it's like, shit, this is real, like it's worth investing a lot of internal company time and resources into building out this consulting unit?
Yeah, so there were two main inflection points, I'd say. Essentially, like one of them was, just working with Kane and Stanny. I bring them up so much because it was such early days for Delphi, so they really helped shape our thinking. And I believe this was Kane on synthetics, but I might be forgetting. It might be like Stanny. But I remember we were working on this one engagement, and it was one of our first consulting engagements. We weren't getting paid much for it. I think it was like 15 grand a month or something like that, right? By the way, 15 grand a month for like all four of us working 24/7 on, just this, all the co-founders working on this full time. So it wasn't like we had multiple engagements. We had like one or two, right? I remember, we were hopping on the call, and we had enjoyed the experience so much. We were still so fresh to it. We were basically, and I don't think they know this, but we were basically going to join the call and say, hey, listen, like if they feel like we're not providing enough value for this money, because back then, like someone paying us 15 grand was like insane. Right? Like we had not getting, we were charging $500 a month for this membership, and we had like 3 or 4 clients, right? So we were like, man, $15,000. This is like a real business now, right? This is like, we're seeing something. So we were about to hop on a call and basically say, hey, listen, we're willing to give you a free month. We'd love to continue working with you guys. And like, we want to give you guys, real value for like the money that you're spending here. And before we could even offer that, and again, I believe it was Kane, he was like, hey guys, like I just want to like talk about the engagement real quick. And like we're all in Telegram like typing each other like, oh guys, like we should like interrupt him and stuff. Thankfully we didn't, because he was basically like, it's been such a pleasure working with your team. He's like, because also at the time we were working on Axie, and this is the second inflection point for sure too. We were sharing some of the ideas and thinking that we were having about that. And one thing that he said that really stuck out to us was like, listen, we're so deep working on synthetics that we can barely look at what other competitors are doing within our own sector, DeFi or open finance at the time, right? Let alone look at a sector that literally no one else is talking or thinking about, right? Like gaming was obviously, and this was like, we were still designing Axie at this point. So it was not even, like there was not one tweet about this yet. That kind of like really informed how we thought about not just building Delphi Consulting, but actually building Delphi at large, right? Like building out these sector teams, allowing, having all this expertise across both sectors and viewpoints, right? Whether it's builder, investor, researcher, etc. So that was a huge inflection point for sure. And that came from a consulting engagement, right? The second inflection point was actually, the Axie engagement, which, and this like a, funny side story. Essentially, Axie was our first engagement ever was like a research consulting engagement for Block Tower. We were big fans of Ari Paul and still are, right? But like back then he was one of our favorite like writers and thinkers in the space. There were very few people who were doing, what inspired Delphi. And I'd say Ari Paul and Multicoin were probably two of the main kind of like inspirations. I'd say like, Ari Paul, we met him at this event where he gave a talk. And then afterwards, this is, before we even had Delphi, made or anything like that. We essentially, afterwards, we were in a circle and a bunch of people were asking him a bunch of questions, a bunch of bad questions, a bunch of okay questions, a bunch of whatever questions, right? And you could tell he was like, certain questions, he was like, man, this isn't even worth my time. And one of my co-founders and partners, MJ, was there as well. We just kind of started fielding and answering certain questions and giving our own thoughts on answers, where they were looking for an experienced investor in crypto's opinion, aka Ari Paul. And meanwhile, we were kind of like fresh answering certain questions. And, after that, Ari kind of like pulled us to the side. I was like, oh, like, I think you guys are really like clever about the space. I think you guys have to think about this the right way. What you guys do? We were telling him, hey, we're going to start a research firm, etc. And, we basically got his business card and we're like, hey, he's like, yeah, let's keep in touch. Like, this is interesting. I like what you guys, how you guys are thinking about the space. And essentially the first engagement that Delphi ever had was a whole report on Ari and his team. Shout out Steve from Block Tower as well. He left to start his own fund just recently. But essentially, they wanted us to look at, blockchain gaming and see if there was anything here. Back then, there were maybe like 7-8 games max, right? Like Gods Unchained and like there was like this one like pet game that I don't want to butcher the name, but like that was the one I got stuck playing and it was like the worst thing ever. Like I literally like, we were all testing out this game, in which, by the way, this is our first engagement ever. Dad, who's now, the CFO of Delphi, he was our accountant. He was helping us start up. He worked close to us in the city. He came over one day and he was like, looked through the WeWork like window and he just saw like, me, Jan, MJ and Kevin all playing games. And he like literally went back home and was like, telling my mom, like, these guys are literally just playing games in their office. And I was like, no, I promise. Like, this is work.
We're finding out. So that was
that. Yeah. I'm like, we're working really hard here, which is pretty funny. But essentially we each kind of got staffed on playing one or two games. The game that I got staffed to play was like My Pet Hooligan or something like that. Like, like some weird, I think it was My Pet Dragon or something like that. And essentially it was the biggest scam because like I went into this game and it said like out of all the games, it had the most users, right? Based off stats. And essentially I went and started playing this game and I entered the room and essentially there were like two people just passing a ball back and forth. And I was like, hey, like, can you guys tell me, is this the right room or like which room is the most active? And they're like, oh, what do you mean? Like, this is like the main room, like, welcome to the game. Like, let us know if you have any questions. It's like, oh, like, it says this has like 10,000, DAUs or MAUs, where is everyone? Right. And they're like, oh, like, yeah, like, it's just like slow. It's a little bit slow right now, but like, it's usually pretty active. And then like over the next hour, like 18 people joined randomly, right? And I was like, all right, this is definitely just their team, just like bringing people.
Like, yo, someone's here.
yeah, exactly. And they were just like, I think they were just counting transactions based off how often they passed that ball, which was kind of like insane to think about. Now, meanwhile, one of my other partners got staffed playing Axie, right? And Axie was again very early days. And again, they were like, yeah, like, I don't know if this is fun or anything. But what was really interesting was the community and the team. And we got really close to those guys very quickly because out of all the games, we were like, hey, you guys are actually thinking about this in a really cool, innovative way. And essentially, and that report, we still have too. Our biggest takeaway for Block Tower was like, listen, all these games suck. It is definitely very early. But if there was one game you were going to invest in, it should be Axie Infinity. And essentially, like Ari and Steve, they were, we hopped on the call. They're like, yo, this is great research. Like literally, honestly, I think we should publish this report just so people can see, because like the level of detail we scored each game, we talked about it. And then, for Axie, we kind of talked about buying certain mystics, which, 18 months later, we actually bought ourselves. So I think it's like it's a great part of Delphi lore for sure. But essentially, we published this report to Block Tower, and they just like, hey, listen, like, and the market had taken even more downturn. Bitcoin went from 6 to 3 grand. The Block Tower team was like, all right, like, we're not thinking about this right now. Like, we got bigger fish to fry. Essentially, we kept that relationship with Axie. They came to us and we're like, hey, listen, maybe 6-9 months later, they're like, hey, listen, we actually are thinking about potentially introducing a token into this game. Like, and we think, they had been really big fans of our Ethereum, synthetics, Aave research and everything like that. They essentially said, would you guys help design this? And we're like, yeah, like we would love to, but like we're a business, we need to get paid. This is kind of like the second inflection point where basically at that point, we had made this 15 grand from, synthetics. We still had really not paid ourselves and we were living in New York City at the time. Essentially, we were broke, right? Like, we had already started like going into credit cards at this time. We were like set to move out of our New York apartment because we're like, man, like we can't afford New York rent. Like we're just going to go live with our parents, like figure this out. But like, we really believe in like making something here. and we threw like a, you know, how people throw a housewarming party. We threw what we called a house cooling party, right? And essentially the day we threw this whole house cooling party, the week after we were supposed to move out, you know, Axie was saying, hey, listen, we do want you to work on this, but we have literally like, we're broker than you guys. We have no cash, but we will pay you in tokens. And we're like, oh man, like this token that like we're not going to see for another like year and a half, 2 years, like we need like cash money right now. Like, I don't know if we can spend time on something that we're not really making real money on. So we were pretty sure we were going to do it just because like we really love that team. But it was really hard place, right? Where we just didn't have cash. At the time, you know, we had a call with A16Z set up. We thought it was just going to be an intro call. It was actually on the day that we were supposed to move out. So we had like a U-Haul downstairs and everything like that. Essentially, we hop on this call and they start telling us like, hey, we're very excited about the space. We're really big fans of your research. We think you guys go like deeper than anyone we've seen. And we're starting our own, you know, A16Z crypto team. And we want a team that will map out every data point and every metric that matters and why it matters. Talk about, you know, what it means if it doesn't matter, you know, like for Bitcoin and Ethereum. And we want these 2 reports within the next like 3 weeks. And we're like, whoa, like we thought this was an intro call, but this is awesome. And we were, you know, obviously played hard to get. We're like, hey, listen, like we're super busy. We got everything going on right now. But like, if, you know, if you guys really need this right now, like in 3 weeks, like, you know, and I remember we were typing in the Telegram chat. I was like, guys, like, I think this is going to be like our first 6-figure deal. You know, we threw out like a number out there, and I remember the chat, like it was like a slight pause and everyone's like, yo, don't do it, Anil. Like we can do this for way less. Like, let's just lock in this for like 50, 60 grand. Threw out like a 6-figure number and we're like, man, this is going to be insane. And then they like literally did not think about it for a second. They're like, oh yeah, sure. Like, yeah, let's do it. Send us paperwork. Like you can get started like today. And we're like, yeah, we can get started today. You know, we hang up the call. We all like going out of our rooms, like, you know, yelling, and we're like, yo, let's fucking go. And then, at the same time, we get a call from the lobby and they're like, yo, like, is U-Haul still like here? And we're like, oh, like actually, can we stay? And they're like, yo, you guys are been assholes. You didn't tell us you were leaving, so we haven't shown your apartment to anyone. So yes, you can stay. And we're like, all right, cool. Like we're gonna stay. They're like, yeah, but like, what the fuck are you gonna do about this U-Haul? We're like, oh yeah, we'll take care of that. But so that was you know, a legendary kind of moment in Delphi history. And you know, I told like Chris Dixon and like a bunch of the A16Z team that, because it really kind of like not just saved Delphi, it really was like allowed us to, you know, stay in our apartments and continue building. And I think like us being all together in that place was such a huge part of that energy that we kind of like cultivated for the first 3-4 years when, you know, we were working 24/7 from the WeWork, coming back home, etc. So yeah, those are like main inflection points, I'd say, for Delphi Consulting. Because then after that, I think all the pieces started fitting into place.
Totally. Because, yeah, outside any amount of money a team can pay you, outside how bullish you could be on the token, like there's an inescapable human element to all these engagements. And if the people aren't happy, their work won't be as good. You'll suffer that burnout. And I know that's something we could talk about for days, and finding meaning in work, but maybe we save that for the follow-up podcast. On that point around the, I guess, people element of these, like what does the SEAL Team 6 look like for one of these consulting engagements? Like, is it kind of like generalist consultants? Is there data engineer required? Is there a heavy like quantitative focus? Like, how do you kind of like piece these together?
Yeah, it all depends on the scope of the engagement. Essentially, like the lead is going to be someone that can communicate very clearly, can constantly have that communication. And that's probably one of the last roles we hired in the last 18 months to really round out the consulting team, which is funny because you would think that was one of the first roles. But, you know, before that, we would have a lot of these, you know, analysts, a lot of these quant focused guys, a lot of these people who would have their hands deep in the trenches, you know, be doing the communication or leading, you know, the relationship. And we quickly realized that they're not the best people to do that. You know, one big part of the consulting engagement, you know, I'd say 50% is the actual work and 50% is communicating what work is expected, when it's expected, why it's expected. So I think, you know, that lead is super important. And, you know, we have like 3 leads that we can staff at any given project, and they can usually take on 2 to 3 deals each. Then under them, you basically have the consulting team, the consulting degens, we kind of like to call them. And essentially, these are just analysts that are super deep in their specific vertical, whether it be DeFi, gaming, like more so markets, infra is a huge sector, right? Essentially, these people are very deep within those sectors. Some of them used to be on the research side and written a lot of the research that, you know, people have seen on Twitter and our portal, obviously, as members. Some of them, you know, we hired as consultants who came from, you know, previous DeFi protocols or protocols in the past. Essentially, these people are, you know, doing a lot of the, you know, modeling out and everything like that. It all really depends on the scope. The cool part about it is, even though you have a set team, and usually the team is probably, I'd say like 3 to 4, two analysts or 3 analysts and one of those leads. And obviously you have like Ashwat kind of sitting at the top, head of consulting, who's like kind of going in and making sure everything's kind of going as planned. But what's cool about it is whenever these teams are going through a specific problem or they're thinking about something that's interesting, as long as it's public knowledge or something that they can kind of like really share or bounce off, other people, they can go to Ashwat, our head of consulting, and say, hey, this is the problem we're going through. This is not like how we're thinking about it, but like it would be great to get some different perspectives. And that's when, the hive mind really comes into play, right? Where you have these researchers, these builders, these investors. Usually it'll start, we have basically, these are all three separate businesses, but we do have like two big group chats that everyone kind of, everyone within Delphi is in together. And usually how it'll start is someone will just ask, a very broad question about more so like philosophical or something, right? About like how they think about certain things. And you'll just have a debate going on and they don't even know that they are giving their opinion or helping this consulting team kind of figure out whether they're thinking about it the right way or is there a gap that they're missing or should be diving deeper in. So what's cool is like, even though you have this team staff for you, that team is part of the broader Delphi hive mind. So at the end of the day, you do have that hive mind kind of working for you as well, indirectly.
Yeah, a lot of kind of like co-mingling between the teams, knowledge sharing that ultimately can lead to these deeper engagements, more valuable work. So I guess maybe when, like, let's say a client approaches you and says, hey, we got a TG coming up, we have our general token model outlined, but like we want you to poke holes in it, help optimize, whatever. Like, what is that like? You mentioned that those month-long engagements. Like, what does kind of the intake look like, or maybe phrased differently, like what information do you guys need that then ultimately kind of informs where you go with that?
Yeah. First off, like maybe I can take a step back because usually teams will come to us and say, hey, Delphi, we want you to write a report on us. We have a TGE or something like that. And this is like a great, pod to be able to say this. But essentially, we don't do any paid research, right? So everything that you see from the research team that we publish is just because the research team was interested in it, was excited about it. Myself, the other co-founders, we don't even know what they're writing about till it's published. Of course, we're going to, seed ideas and say, hey, this could be interesting. Hyperliquid, would be great to see that report. Deepin would be great to see that report. I don't know when it's coming out, if it's coming out, etc. That is all up to the research team and our head of research, Ceteris, right? Who crushes that. A lot of these calls, it starts off by us saying, oh, we don't do this paid research. And they're like, oh, come on. Like, we know there's a number, etc. And we're like, no, like we literally have, turned down this for, 6 years now. And we're never going to do it. The only teams that we want to work with on the consulting side are teams that actually want to pay us for value. And that's why these due diligence reports are so important, because in the name, I said earlier, right, it's internal due diligence reports. And that's really when you can see if a team's serious or not, because we always say, hey, we're not publishing this. This is not coming out with a Delphi brand. You cannot publish this on your site or your Slack channel or anything like that. This is just from us to you for your team to kind of get the knowledge and our insights for your protocol. And, a lot of teams will say, oh, fuck that. I just wanted to show piece, etc. And that'll make the call go much faster. It'll be easy. And it gives us, again, this process helps us feel the elephant a little bit more of us saying, all right, yeah, like that team, a lot of people think that team's legit, etc. But they're playing, the narrative game or anything like that, right? Like it's actually like very bullish for us when teams do see value in the actual work, or better yet, do exactly what you said. They come to us and say, hey, we actually want you guys to poke holes. We're not even looking for a report or anything like that. Even if they, don't know that we have never done, paid research or anything like that. So, now back to your question, essentially like when a team does come to us, and again, the scope, it really depends on the scope, what protocol, what team you're looking at. But I'd say the first thing that we always ask before our head of consulting, and, he'll pick certain people within a specific vertical. If it's a DeFi protocol, obviously bring on some of the DeFi consulting analysts. If it's an infra protocol, vice versa. Essentially what he'll ask is any documentation and any write-up about what stage they're at, what they're looking to solve, etc., why it matters, etc. That alone is a really important part. Like our, Ashwath, he always says that like, if a team can't write and hasn't already explained their problem or what they're solving or where they're at and can't explain that to me via messages, then this is probably not a team that we want to work with. Right? Like writing is such an important part of the space. So you already need that just to be successful. But work-wise, it's super important because, there's certain teams and again, trade-offs. So there's certain teams that working style, it's like they'll just get on a call and knock through everything. Maybe take like a AI robot or something and like take notes, and then they'll just know it in their brain and keep going. But it makes an engagement very hard for a team like ours who's consulting, right? So we really do need to work with the team. And we're very flexible with the types of teams we work with, but we really need to prioritize teams that are really good at being writers, being able to like chat async, explain what they're working on. So the first thing I'd say is like, it's not about what documentation we get. It's more so like how, what quality of that documentation. And that's kind of like the first. And honestly, usually we'll start up a chat and everything like that. And, there are definitely certain teams that we've worked with that are like very high quality that will chat very quick messages and everything like that. But there are certain teams that you'll work with that are so detailed and even the replies to you, right? And, oh, this is the documentation. These are, some questions that we always receive. This is how we're thinking about it. These are the bullet points, etc. And it's like, oh man, this is awesome. This is like, making our job even easier, right? Even that like engagement, that relationship building is like a huge part of how we decide to work on, the protocol, and teams, etc. Basically, after, hopping on a call with them, if they give us these 3 to 5 things after that call, we'll just dive into the documentation and everything like that and see if there is something here that we find interesting enough to do that internal due diligence agreement, engagement for, right? And then once that engagement starts, it's basically weekly or bi-weekly calls. And again, it's all flexible based on teams. There are certain teams that don't want to get on a call every week. If they have really good documentation, we don't need to do that either, right? That's even better for our team where they'll do our work. We'll go away, work for like a week and a half, obviously talk on Telegram if we have any questions or anything like that. But every 2 weeks, we'll hop on, kind of give them an update saying, hey, this is what we're currently working on. This is what we've shipped. You guys read through this. What would be really helpful is like you guys giving comments specifically in these sections or answers in these sections. And then we're going to go work on this while you kind of like work on that. Right. Yeah. It's really like a team process. I think like Ashwath and our team has done like a really good job of making this as standardized as it can get because it really can't be standardized, I'd say.
And you pretty much become paid curiosity satisfiers, right? Just getting to explore what you're interested in. That's what ultimately makes for the most interesting work. But cool. So maybe it's a good time to zoom out a bit and talk about kind of the consulting industry as a whole in crypto. Because right now it's still quite small, right? Like you guys are very like specialist team sort of serving this niche. But as crypto evolves, right? Like let's picture ourselves in the $10 trillion market cap crypto world. There's just more economic activity flowing around. Like who do you see as like new entrants into this world? Like, is there a world in which McKinsey, Bain, BCG, like they decide like, hey, we like to think we're the smartest guys in the room. Like, let's try to put our work into token design. Or do you think like there's something inherent about it where you kind of need that crypto nativity?
It's a great question. I really like short answer. I think the crypto degens are going to like rule this world. And I think you've already seen a lot of other shots pop up, like, Larry with Reverie. I know the Blockworks guys, a few of them just left to start something that focused just on Arbitrum, right? And I think there should be dozens and hopefully hundreds more because that means that there's actually demand for this. And, you actually have these service providers who are so focused on helping kind of fill parts of the stack that are needed to make a, real big big DAO kind of like actually work. On the McKinsey side and everything like that, like, we've actually had good conversations with them and they've been very clear to us that they have no intentions of entering this space. They actually, we have a really good relationship where they'll send us deal flow where people say, hey, these people want to design a token, go talk to the Delphi guys, etc. So, shout out to those guys because obviously that's a, great referral. Although I don't think we've ever actually accepted one of those engagements because they're, again, not like the crypto. I don't think they're going to get like the best protocols either, right? As referrals. And that's, not their MO. So it's nothing, no shade or anything like that. Obviously think very highly of McKinsey. We people from our team who used to work there, etc. But I'd say like the way that I see this evolving is a lot of mini teams like Delphi. And obviously Delphi is like big scale at this point, right? We have, almost 100 people across these 3 divisions. But, I think you will see teams like Reverie and stuff pop up that are focused on working on very specific parts of, or grants or, proposals or RFPs that come out on these forums. Now, what I think is going to be really important here is the DAOs being very flexible on how they work with these service providers. Because every service provider that started working here, whether it was Larry, whether it was the Blockworks guys, before they started this or when they started this, they'd reach out and, just have a very similar conversation as this, learn about how Delphi Consulting. And as as a good friend, like I don't want to like hide anything. Like I want to be very transparent about how Delphi's thinking about this, how we built this up. I want to see multiple other shops do the same thing because I think it's really important. When we first got started and it was really only Delphi, it was super frustrating because we felt like we were the only ones dealing with these problems. So it's exciting to have other people, going through these DAO problems and everything like that. And I think these DAOs are getting really educated and getting very aware of their shortcomings, right? So, shout out, like we work with Arbitrum in the past, we work with Optimism in the past. They both take very different ways, but they both are trying to tackle the same problems, I'd say. And that problem is really, how do you let the service provider actually focus on what they're doing and what the work that needs to be done, rather than figure out how to go through the process to even get paid or get approved and etc. I think I do like the open nature of DAOs. I think it should be public. I think their work should be public, etc. But I think a lot of this decision making and, when you do have someone with 10 ARB that has a very loud voice on the forums and is trying to poke holes, it's very detrimental to the protocol when, 6 figures or, potentially 7-figure deal may seem like a lot, but you got to understand these protocols are $1 billion unicorn protocols, right? I think they need, for better or for worse, the community, and thing in crypto, and I use it in quotes because community is it's so mercenary in crypto. Everyone is a part of hundreds of communities at this point, right?
Yeah.
So you really have, there are only a few, I'd say DeFi protocols and stuff that have had people who've stayed and, are active on the governance forums just because of their exposure or their tokens they have. But there's so much apathy in these markets where these teams need to end up paying and incentivizing people to provide value. I think it's crazy when people are, and of course people complain about airdrops and, things like that, but I think it's crazy that people okay with people getting money for free, essentially, right, via airdrops, people getting paid to, add liquidity and stuff, which is obviously very valuable to Bootstrap a protocol. But then when service providers are actually working on figuring out if that makes sense or not, people have a loud voice and say, oh, does this make sense, etc. It's like, yo, you're spending right now 80 mil a year on incentives and you're worried about 800 grand, right? So yeah. I think that is something that these DAOs are working really hard to figure out. I've been very kind of encouraged. I think from our side, we still prefer working with teams directly rather than working with the DAO at large. What Arbitrum's done with ARDC and so on has been really encouraging and kind of motivating.
Yeah. So maybe on that note, and we can end on this, how do you see the future of Delphi Consulting? You guys clearly found kind of your groove working with these 15 to 20 teams. Do you see yourself doubling down on this type of work and trying to scale internal resources? Any kind of crazy ideas for new services? I know you guys had Delphi Design kind of come out very organically from just the good work that you were already starting to do. Would love to hear, of course, anything you could share on that.
Yeah, it's, we do have conversations about this a lot. And I've said this on, I said this on the Empire podcast too, when Jason asked me, what's Delphi's 5-year, 10-year plan. I think one thing I've learned in crypto is having a 5-10-year plan is you're basically not going to make it. So we do have North Stars and everything like that, right? And when we think about Delphi Consulting and what our North Star is, it is really kind of helping consult and advise on the, protocols that actually reach the masses, as well as kind of innovate on mechanisms that end up being used in protocols and other engagements that reach the masses. It's kind of the main core goal. On the Delphi Design side, that kind of I'm glad you brought that up. That basically was birthed from need, right? For us, we were working so hard on, maybe the technical and, the financial engineering. And we realized that we could only do so much there. Then, if the protocol did a bad, if the team did a bad job of portraying a lot of this hard work that we did or not conveying it in the best UI or UX, it was super frustrating for us. And, we have, I think, some of the best designers in the space who had not just finished work on Delphi's website and our portal, which they did a phenomenal job on, but also on a lot of our incubations. After that, we were hey, we have this big design team. Let's see if we can help add a lot of value and help, design stuff for other big protocols. And they, again, don't have too much capacity because they were only working with 2 to 3, Delphi Labs incubations at any given time. But they basically just finished their first cohort and work with 3 protocols, Monad, El Dorado and stuff, doing certain design work for them, whether it's animation, whether it's UI, branding, UX, etc. And I think that's something that we're super excited about because I think, a lot of the work on the Delphi Consulting side, unless you are, frequenting the Delphi Consulting webpage and stuff like that, it's hard for people to know. And that's why I was excited when you brought up this idea of the pod. I was yeah, what Delphi Consulting deserves is its own hour, right? Rather than a 5-minute kind of inclusion in the story of Delphi at large. Delphi Design, I think is really cool because I think a lot of the work there is going to be so tangible. It's going to be so visible. Our hope there, they have some crazy ideas for, some big L1s, L2s. And if anyone wants to talk to their team, please reach out. They're currently accepting applicants for, their second cohort. They have some crazy ideas where they even, help launch one of these. And they already have like a lot of mock-ups and stuff that I think could be really cool for a big kind of like team to really like push forward to the space. It'll be really cool because as soon as you see it and, people on Twitter are like, oh, like Solana UX, for example, is a great example where this is amazing. This is way better, or Jupiter and something like that. So I think Delphi design is really cool because I think it'll be tangible for people to see kind of like the direct impact that we're having. And really that's what, we think about it at the end of the day, right? The mission of Delphi at large is to make crypto happen sooner and better than it would without us. And I think each division, each arm plays such an important role. And I think Delphi Consulting is us really like rolling up our sleeves and working with the teams that we think are aligned with that mission. That is probably the best place to like end on that note. But one thing I'll also kind of say, because you do ask about like what the future looks like, to look in the past, like there was a stage of Delphi Consulting in that 2021 bull cycle when Elon was on SNL and like NFTs were everywhere and everything like that, where we got a lot of inbound from big Fortune 500 companies, FANG companies. We were working with multiple teams. We were really excited about it, honestly. We thought we were making a huge impact. We thought, this is a way for us to help guide these teams that already have such big distribution, such big eyeballs on them, such great IP to navigate the space in the right way. And again, that kind of like started out of what we call duty, rather than desire. Because at that point, the fund was going really well. At that time, we weren't as desperate as we were when at the start of this conversation where we were talking about synthetics and like Axie and stuff like that. But we really started that out of duty. And what happened really quickly, and we designed I personally think like some of the coolest things that, have never seen the light of day. They've just been stuck in Fortune 500 and FANG companies like legal departments, right? And that kind of like really turned us off because, we put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into like those projects. And sure, it was like a good payday and everything like that. But for us, what we really realized was like, we really want to see our work kind of like out there in the wild and kind of get that feedback loop, right? Like right now, I think especially specifically two of these like ideas for FANG type companies were like really special, but I don't know if that for a fact, right? They could have launched it and it could have been a dud. Not knowing that is actually way more painful than us seeing it launch and it, being a dud. So what that really resulted in was us going way deeper into working with just crypto native protocols because they work much faster. Obviously, negotiation and like cycles are much quicker too, right? My favorite part is you actually see these things launch. You actually get that feedback loop. All this to say that I'm a crypto maxi, as you know, right? Like I'm a perma bull as well. Like I think these Fortune 500 and FANG companies are going to come back eventually. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And I think our team will always be there to work on some of those engagements. But I think we're gonna, we don't want to do this for someone doing like a pilot or to get like a buzzword for their board or something like that. We want to make sure we're working with a team that is very committed to it. So I think like that is going to be an area that, then you could see the McKinseys and stuff kind of like go into that. But I think at the end of the day, these Fortune 500 companies, as they did in 2021, I think you kind of saw the start of this. They did kind of realize that they needed to talk to the crypto native teams. Like Adidas and G Money we're really, really close with G. That was like a really good engagement. And obviously that hasn't gone many places, but that's not because of, G's fault or anything like that. He's given them dozens of ideas. And, I've talked to him a lot about this too. He can only take it so far. And I think that's like one of the biggest risks and why we do love working with these crypto native teams that are always willing to kind of like put themselves out there rather than just do it for a quick campaign and then, oh, this is not a priority anymore. And now we're rugging our NFT holders or whatever the fuck. So yeah, it's a broad kind of like North Star, but yeah, basically just like, keep providing impact as much as we can.
Yeah, you can leave McKinsey to help IBM figure out how to put their blockchains on or their tomatoes on a blockchain. But yeah, if you're protocol looking for token design, Delphi, those are the guys for it. For listeners looking to check into that more, as you're saying, all the consulting work, you can find that freely available. Highly recommend getting a research subscription as well. Some of the brightest thinkers in the space. Yeah, this is an awesome conversation, Neil. Appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, man. Appreciate it.